does being first in academia actually matter? And I hear this a lot, right? The sort of view of the field, and we hear this is like popular culture in terms of viewing the world as a competition. I think this is very American in a lot of different ways, but it's sort of bled into all sorts of the world. And I want to push back on that. So first of all, if you think of, how awards are distributed, and you think about how resources are handled within academia, we only have a limited number of resources that we have available, right? So typically those go to people that are well-known. And how you get well-known is you publish a lot about different things. And then often those things that you're publishing about are new ideas, right? So by the definition of simply saying new ideas, I'm pointing out that, yes, new does, or being first actually does matter, right? Like, if you think about it, it should matter. That's what we're into. We're thinking about search and discovery. And you might think, he's totally wrong, that first shouldn't matter. I want to talk about how research is actually done and how it actually occurs, right? So it's within the process of doing it that you realize that it doesn't matter that much. And this desire to push, I'm talking about the difference between the desire to push for first, to drive that competitive advantage and all of that kind of stuff. That's all nonsense. It's garbage. What's going to happen is that if you're a clever person, you can always convert ideas into firsts. What's going to happen is that you're going to study something, right? It doesn't matter what it is. You might be, and this is really true of early year PhD students. They'll sort of say, hey, I should study this really hot thing that's going on. So right now, I don't know, digital currency or something like that that's going on. It's 2022, so it's not going to matter in 10 years like it does right now. It's going to be kind of irrelevant, and it's not going to be a conversation, right? But at the time, it's kind of like, oh, this is a big thing. We should study this and jump on it. And so you jump on it and you study it, and you realize that, hey, wait a minute, all of this stuff that we know, all of it, everything that we know is actually really old. And most of it is from around, 100 years ago, right? Like really old stuff of that we understand and how we look at it. Now, why is it that this old stuff is still relevant in terms of what we know and what's going on? Well, things are building on each other, right? And typically human beings, the way the world functions, all of that kind of the universe functions, kind of follow some rules and laws. And, we have another thing. We have constraints on our mind in terms of what we can think of and what we can do, right? So none of this stuff is ever really new and novel in any sort of way. It's rebranded in terms of a different thing, right? So what you could do, and this is what often happens, in order to be first in some sort of area. I've seen this so many times. And, you talk to really senior folks that have done really good jobs at research. They'll say that, hey, you know what? I actually was talking about that thing, but that person just had a better branding for it, and it took off for them. So what ends up happening is that it's the way that you phrase things or the way that people would discuss something that matters the most, right? So you could study something incredibly old and boring, right? So in my field, if you studied, we study business, right? Like that's the thing. So if you studied business from the 1500s, people would say that's old and irrelevant. Wait a minute, if you look at it in a different angle and you think about it in a completely different way, all of a sudden it becomes super interesting and super relevant. So it's the way that you actually carry on the conversation, you think about things that actually matters. And that happens a lot. It's not about being first. there's always some way to look at something differently. If you look at the same data, if I gave the same data to 100 scholars and researchers that were world class, I would probably, do you think I'd get like one answer back from that? You'd probably say, yeah, you get one answer from that. Some of you that are really intelligent, you'd probably say, no, you get 100 answers back. No. You're going to get 5,000 answers back, because those bright and intelligent scientists and researchers, they understand how the world works, and they can look at it from many different angles. And if you can look at it from many different angles, you realize that there's infinite number of ways to do things. There's infinite number of solutions. There's all sorts of things that you can look at and never run out of ideas. There's really no such things as first or last in the scientific game. You're just coming up with new ways of thinking about things. And the reason why people often get, prizes and research awards and all of that kind of stuff, it's not necessarily that they're first, but it's their way of looking at things that is unique and different. And it's not necessarily a competition, but you're just more curious in a different way that other people would not have thought about before. It's not necessarily a first thing. It's not a competition thing. It's a confidence thing. I'm going to go do something that the rest of the world is telling me not to go do because it's too scary for them to do. And I'm going to do it, and I'm going to stand up. Jane Goodall, for example, right? Like, that's one that everybody knows. She went and lived with apes. Nobody was doing that, right? Like, that was a big thing. That was a scary thing. That's why she's well known as Jane Goodall, is because she did something that was unique and different and had courage, and they stood up. It wasn't because they were first or they were better or anything like that. They had confidence. She knew what she wanted to do, and she just did it. And I think that's where you all have to stop thinking about the world in terms of competition. I hate that word. I hate what it does to people. I think everything, and there's very few things I hate in this world, by the way, but I think it turns people into monsters that they normally are not monsters. And I think if we started viewing the world as like, hey, I'm not weak, I don't have strengths and all those kind of things, I'm just uniquely different, and I could build on those unique differences and get better at those unique differences. And those unique differences, those are really cool. I can emphasize those things, and I can push those things. And that's the stuff that I should actually be exploring, is those unique things, not something that everybody viewing the world as a competition immediately sets out that there's a limited amount of resources, that everybody is cutthroat against each other. Like, it just creates so much animosity. I want you to take a step back and say, I'm just going to live my life. And my life's pretty cool. And I'm going to create my own solutions, and they're pretty cool too. And that's how you actually get to do good and interesting things that nobody else has thought of before. Not trying to think of what everybody else is doing and positioning against them. That's not what you do. How you do it is you be you. And you grow and develop you even more. So being first, that's not the real thing that you're supposed to be interested in. The real thing is figuring out how do you be you even more.